Hello, Alex, and everyone. Welcome to
Hello.
episode 6 of our podcast. Yeah, time is passing so quickly when one has fun. I suggest wider topic suggestions to talk about today. Then maybe could you present them in the beginning, and then we let the rest flow and see where it goes. First topic I would suggest for today's session is avoidance versus growth, and how both of those can influence success, maturity, and our capability for autonomy and granting others and ourselves freedom. An important caveat when we talk about growth is that it's not performative growth, because certain people who say they're focusing on growth can see that as a performance and maybe avoid it again. So I guess it will be a task to carefully look at what that means. Avoidance patterns can coincide with different other personality structures. Extreme forms can coincide with narcissism and other clinically recognized problematic patterns. So I think that can be an interesting thing we have to first talk about and see what consequences does that have for maturity and us being in touch with reality. And I would claim already that being in touch with reality is an important precondition for autonomy and freedom. And the second topic that builds on the first is individuation as a precondition for freedom and autonomy. That is about knowing oneself properly. The famous author Hermann Hesse, most of his writings are introspective and about one's own development journey. I would put an emphasis on two works which describe in one form or another individuation. One of them is Siddhartha, a journey of a very intelligent, ambitious ascetic who searches for what's important in life. Another one is Steppenwolf from Hesse, which is also about integrating different facets, maybe more closely to the typical Jungian form of individuation. Recognize all the parts in our selves and integrate them instead of trying to push some away because we don't like them. So pretty much accepting ourselves as we are, integrating different parts instead of putting away something like the wild side in ourselves or whatever that might be. Shall we start with the avoidance topic?
I think what you mentioned, avoidance and growth, and for me it resonates. There's this distinction between playing to win and playing not to lose. Sometimes people are becoming defensive, so they don't want to make risks. So people develop some kind of cautiousness in their life. And often in order to tap into the seed of greatness that all of us have, to tap into the growth, we need to take risks. Obviously, everyone has a different appetite for risks. But without taking risks, without facing the possibility of losing, it's very hard to win. It's very obvious when it comes to sports. Like, you can play in defense, but still, you need to score goals in order to win. When people are becoming too focused on not losing, avoiding opportunities and trying to safeguard the safe pathway in their lives, then it becomes like a neurotic pattern, and it's very difficult to achieve growth. That's my first response to what you mentioned.
For me, in the last months, years, I again and again observe when looking at other people I know for a while and their success, their maturity, their attitude today, I so often come back to, maybe there's certain bias in it, but that's what I'm currently convinced, come back to seeing in the end, the certain intelligence level, a certain competence level, those things didn't count so much. What counted whether those people are willing to face things, whether they face their problems or avoid them. And people from school where see who has success, who doesn't. I feel there's a pretty clear divide between people who face their things, people who don't. And those who don't have this downward trajectory. I think in the beginning of life, when you start doing something, you don't see much difference to someone who doesn't. And like locally or short-term on school, you might think, what an idiot. What? Stressing himself. Well, I just have fun and avoid it. But over time, like rice corns on a chess field, 1, 2, 4, very small numbers for a long time, and then it just explodes. Same interest, even with steadily reading 10 minutes of good literature every evening. That pays off. Or doing sport for quite a while, you don't see much of a difference, but then you have this interest of interest repayments, especially because you easily get to a new level of maturity or growth or learn alongside it. And confronting things consistently over a long time gets you slowly to a level that seems very far attached from where you started.
And when you talk about facing things, confronting things, do you mean when it's related to risks or not?
I feel it's a general attitude. I feel uncomfortable or something is off. Then there's all those people that go in a pub or a bar at night and just drink or turn on television, right, to numb themselves. Try to push yourself away from reality. You make up stories, you avoid what's real, and then you kind of build around your narratives to protect your ego and not having to face problems that you're feeling off and so on, right?
You know, we had this technical issue, so we were not able to connect the time that we planned. And I started scribble something because I noticed this kind of irritation. I'm quite punctual and I want to start on time. And I noticed the irritation and I just sat with it for a moment. And the idea that came up for me, the analogy is that kids prefer sweet food. So they just want to eat candies, cakes, whatever. But with time, we start to appreciate different tastes. So olives doesn't come naturally early in age, or truffles, or bitter stuff, or sour stuff. And it's interesting that in that moment, I was able to notice this irritation. And it's very easy to, when we don't acknowledge irritation, to become reactive on it. I could have become irritated with you, even though it's not your fault. But when I'm able to sit there, to almost like savor it, I notice that it's not so bad. It's a pleasant feeling. It's weird to think of irritation as a pleasant thing because it's much better to listen to birds or enjoy the sun rays. The springtime is amazing. But I notice that when I'm able to develop taste and appreciation of different type of emotions, different palate, it becomes much easier to go through different challenges in my life. So I think it's related to what you're saying about how to face things, how not try to avoid and only search for quick dopamine or easy dopamine obstructions like drinks, stupid, empty TV series and stuff like that.
Yeah, learn that for myself, especially after some breakups, can be a really nice feeling once surpassing or allowing oneself to go over that barrier of discomfort to almost curiously embrace what's there. Connecting this maybe a bit to the discussion with last time, I think playfulness and curiosity, which I think go together very closely, are important, helpful drives to growth and to embrace what's there. And like a crazy scientist Look at what is there interesting. How does that really feel like? What do I get if I really explore the corners of what's there? And I feel often doing this successfully, being able to do that, can be a very pleasant or fulfilling feeling. It's not just a feeling of growth, but it's a feeling of peace and groundedness. And for me, being more in touch with myself. When I manage to do that, I feel I can tap more into myself and act out of myself again. When I have those disturbances and don't explore them or feel into them and continuously do that, then I feel I get more and more out of touch with myself. And that's easy to get into an avoidance mindset because then this grows and it's harder to feel in that discomfort.
I'm thinking of this idea of spiritual development, which typically coincides with psychological development as well. More often than not, it is portrayed as being in the
spiritual
moment.
development for you?
Appreciating the mystery of life. In a way, being present in the moment.
Okay.
So it's about if I'm angry, being angry. If I'm hungry, being hungry. Like this Zen story about the master from the monastery and someone comes to challenge them and they say, my master can wave his paintbrush and hieroglyphs appear in 100 meters. What are the miracles that you can perform? And that master answers like, my miracle is that I can eat when I'm hungry and I can drink when I'm thirsty. So I think that's the definition or example of spiritual development, like really be there in the moment. The way I heard you describing it, being able to be alive and live through the body that we have, not only through the head, through the ideas only. And then playfulness comes up, creativity comes up, and also, which is a bit paradoxically, but success, typically financial success also comes up.
When looking at the people, especially those I know longer and where I now notice those avoidance trajectories, oftentimes success coincides with maturity and being able to give space to others. So like a healthy relationship building, grant freedom to others, but also understand and manage their own freedom and autonomy, being less dependent on others. And while that's not a necessary consequence, I would think it is a necessary precondition to go through some form of growth to properly, not just by saying the words freedom and autonomy, but properly live, granting others freedom, granting others autonomy, granting yourself those things. How do you want to properly succeed in being autonomous yourself or granting autonomy if you don't even face reality properly?
Yeah.
And the avoidance path brings you further and further away from it. And I feel there is oftentimes when I see people, there is not so much middle ground. Because it's a very weird path we all in small things avoid. But I think it's really rare to have someone who is somewhere in between, who maybe gets more in touch with reality and then completely avoids again. Because once knowing what it is like and having that curiosity, it would be almost having a second personality to completely giving that up, going into another mode and completely forget about how much value can lie in properly being in touch with yourself and facing problems.
And also, again, connecting to the idea of present, and I think it's related to what you just said. Avoidance typically means being in the past or being in the future. So a lot of people are living the kind of postponed life, like I will have something only when the kids grow up, or I have a promotion, or I move to another country, or the taxes are lower, or whatever. So they delay the activities that they truly want to engage into until something. So basically, they are not in the present. They are in imaginary future, which typically gets postponed again and again and again. Or another extreme is being in the past. So sometimes it's about trauma, sometimes it's about projections. So we compare new people we meet with people we already know, we already make some assumptions, which basically overhangs from the past. They're not about the real people that are in front of us, the real situations that are in front of us. We're facing some kind of imprint from the past, and we're looking through those lenses. And because of that, we are not able to see the present. We're not able to see this real person, this real opportunity to meet and encounter them.
Yeah, I think this avoidance mindset, I think that's right. It gets people in a state of not even trying to build reality. First, because it can be also extremely threatening. If you already built narratives to avoid reality, to protect their ego, to then probably see someone for who they are. At least when it comes close to something which doesn't fit with your narrative, you would be quick to jump to conclusions. Not even allow yourself to see that there could be something new that doesn't fit with your current narrative. It's more a narrative-driven thing, almost like someone living from conclusions.
Yeah, from the concepts.
Right? Like if you have an argument, someone who constantly argues from conclusions, they want this to be the outcome. They have their evening and they want the other people to fit in that picture. And then they construct around that, or only allow those things that confirm, disregard the other. And I need that for real growth, presumably need some kind of curiosity to really look at reality.
Yeah. For example, how kids draw things, like a stick figure. So the author has this idea that why are people creating these simplistic drawings is because they think of the concept of the tree, of the arm, and they create the stick. But in order to be able to draw in a good way, you need to see things. But when you're too focused on the concept of what the face is like around, the hand is like stick, you're not able to see them in a real way. And for example, I remember the first exercise in this book is like you draw your head, but you kind of turn it away.
Yeah.
So that you're not looking at it the way you used to look at it, and you can see it in a different way. And that way it's easier to follow the real patterns, the real lines. That's a great example. Or in a different context, let's say you're a manager or a leader, and you already have certain concept of this person who reports to you. You're not interacting with them, but you start to interact with your concept of them. And then it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy because you think that they're not performing well, you're not giving them more tasks, they cannot show themselves, and then it's just like a snowball.
Yes, and you can do the same to yourself if you always think you're bad at math, for example, and never try, and you're anxious to face tasks because you think you'll be bad at it anyway, then you'll be bad at it, right?
In spiritual jargon, two words that came up often is awakening and liberation. Awakening to presence, and liberation is liberating yourself from those things that you dwell on too much, and then being present to.
I think maturity is important to be able to see reality and embrace freedom and autonomy. And I think in that context, also thought about identity and anti-fragility of one's own identity. The avoidance part is something, the more you avoid, is increasingly fragile. Because you cling to a made-up story that's more and more in conflict with reality. There's more and more tension. It's more and more likely that you have a big almost black swan event for yourself, breaking. And also you have, I don't know if it's necessary, but I haven't encountered people who avoid with, let's say, a multifaceted identity, but more with one very rigid identity that they can't switch out of. And I thought recently, especially with AI developments, faster technological developments, the world moving in ever shorter innovation cycles, I thought it's increasingly important to have a somewhat anti-fragile identity, maybe even seeing deconstructed. So not to see oneself as fixed categories, but integrate different parts and be willing to put more focus on one or another part. Kind of optionality in one's identity. Right? So if one thing brings some tension or difficult developments, then this doesn't jeopardize or threaten your whole being. You don't go in defense and avoidance so much. You're like, okay, that's one of my aspects and I can focus on something else or reinvent myself. So someone who's not stuck to be seen as the car mechanic as part of their identity, for example. Mm. In German, you have this word which is very close to Beruf, which also means job. Die Berufung is something that's more foreseen by destiny, right? So it's kind of identity building.
Vocation.
Yes, correctly. And connected with this, I think to grow in an at least resilient way, not fragile. Yeah. It's important not too seriously, not too rigidly stick with the picture of yourself. Because otherwise you easily go in this idealization storytelling. Also, a rigid identity is a form of, I tell myself a story. And I'm not open to what else I can explore in myself and not being open to integrating this or that. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think that's something that can be very helpful in the path to growth and to, also especially being a successful in fast-changing environments, to adapt and be open to new options, opportunities.
This is related to shadow work, because typically why people have those rigid identities, because a lot of stuff is suppressed, not acknowledged, not, Carl Rogers would say, not symbolized. So we are not able to process the kind of stuff. His example would be someone who has the identity of good mother, and she feels irritated towards the child, and she denies this feeling in herself. Mm. And obviously what it would lead to is either some somatic illnesses, or it will lead to passive aggressiveness. This idea of I'm a good mother is a hindrance towards becoming an integrated person. And this person can have a broader anti-fragile identity of I'm a good mother, which includes me having different aspects of emotions toward my children.
Yeah, I feel a lot of socialists or leftist people have the big transactional shadow side, while a lot of, not all, but a lot of libertarians may be compassionate or loving shadow side. Okay? Yeah. So I feel there's an interesting phenomenon in a lot of leftist people who sell themselves as very empathic, very compassionate. But weirdly enough, in the way they do business, they are way more, a German word, Raubtierkapitalismus, like this wild animal capitalism, very transactional, almost very short-term advantage exploitative in how they do business. Transactions, there's not much of a compassion partnership often in business. And I think that happens.
One thing. So if we are good and nice to people and compassionate because we must be that way, it's not genuine. Only when we can be not compassionate, only when we can be not nice, then there's value in our being compassionate. When we have choice, then it means something. When we do it because we don't have a choice, it doesn't mean anything.
Yes, if someone is rich or has power, you see their character, because if you're poor, you usually have to be nice. But once you have money and power, you don't have to be anymore. I think it's maybe a bit of a different question if someone has to be that, because I think in this scenario, it would be better for them or more helpful to be a purely transactional relationship building business person too. I don't think something they can allow themselves. I think they're in a way partly blind and maybe partly also feeling they are the losers, oppressed in this anyway, so they have to fight back. Yeah. So it might be several factors. And with people on the libertarian side, it's of course not always. There's mature people in both camps, but on a broader spectrum, I had an experience of people who give themselves as transactional capitalist deal makers, but who actually are very giving non-transactional helping when something is coming out, right? To just give a helping hand and not expecting something in return, while painting themselves as being those badass transactional type of people.
I'm curious, what do you think is the connection or implication of growth, the way we talk about it right now, and people's autonomy and people's freedom?
I think, for one thing, what I mentioned in the beginning, I think it's an important precondition to be autonomous and free for oneself, which comes to the topic of individuation, knowing who I am, so to not just follow maybe external goals set upon me by society, which doesn't lead to a really autonomous setting. I might follow things I think I care about, but it creates friction and could say it's kind of a fake autonomy. Then I think you need to know reality to put autonomy in place, right? If you tell yourself stories about reality, then you don't choose the adequate actions to put something in place to have a self-determined life and to live out your inner drive to act in the world, which I think is a very deep-rooted basic drive of a human who doesn't know themselves. Doesn't society so much put them down that they just exist like a plant? And I think that's also a precondition to allow that in others. In the same way as if you don't know how to love yourself, it can be really hard to properly love others. If you don't know what even autonomy means, how to give it yourself, then you can't properly grant it to others. Or at least more in a contingent way. So, knowing yourself, individuation, and knowing the world, or being open to properly look at the world, I think are preconditions. What do you think?
Yeah, my thoughts are very similar. I think in order to be free, to say I am free, like pronoun I needs to be self-aware, because if I am free by playing the role, if I must be a kind mother all the time, it means that I need to play a role and not really myself. So if not really myself is free, then it doesn't make any sense. Like, in order to be free, we need to be able to express our wholeness, which includes a lot of suppressed material. And I think also that ties to the definition of success, because typically we think of success in terms of outside things. And there's an interesting book written by palliative nurse, 5 Regrets of Dying. Like, typically when people die, external things fade away because they were not that important. So I think success, fortunately, very difficult to measure while we in the progress. And it's much easier to measure when we are dying at the end of our life, at the deathbed.
To say success is success as we see it, right? So what we think, what we strive towards, what we think is success, not success in the terms society puts on us, right?
Yeah, or parents.
Individuation. Yes.
More often than not, it's not how much money we have, but what would we regret that didn't happen in our life in case it would end today. This existential tool of how can we face our death today. In the samurai books, you often think about death because then it can guide your present life.
Yes. Very early in the podcast series, I talked about the history of politics as a history of infantilization. And I think even people are not mature, don't grow enough, don't individuate. They can think they are maybe there or tell themselves those stories. But when going out of infantilization, of course, if people don't grow, don't individuate, don't become mature, then society or group or self-determined, free, autonomous people won't work well. Might end up in quite a disaster if most of those people are not mature. So I guess it is a precondition practically in terms of it externally practically works. This process of maturity is another precondition to be able to successfully move out of this state of infantilization.
In maturity and individuation, it requires certain kind of individualism, not synonymous with selfishness, but like in order to fully become who I am, I need to in some way break away from society. So I need to have some kind of separateness. I need to be able to look at who I am, not as a part of the collective, not as a part of society, but as a separate being that has separate needs, separate body, separate ideas, that has their own seed of genius in themselves. So I think it's also very important to not lose oneself, because sometimes people confuse that growth and development is about just not being selfish, becoming part of society, becoming collective, which is a very simplistic way to look at it, because we need to acknowledge who we are, also with some real needs that we have as biological organisms.
Good that you mentioned that, because I think that might often be a confusion of two different ways of collectivism. So in a way, I think individuation, maturity, growth is you become an individual entity. So in that sense, growing up, not avoiding, is always towards somewhat individual anarchist, individual autonomy. It's a path towards successfully going there. In a fall, you can, of course, by the conditions of your being pretty much, you become anti-collectivist and individualist. Then externally endorse a certain culture or care or self-help, especially if you're convinced that other people are not as mature, and they will be intentionally or unintentionally assholes to others because they're not mature. They'll treat others badly. You can, of course, endorse a certain form of even forced collectivism because you think it's necessary, so there won't be as much suffering and pain in the world. But it's a different form of collectivism. It's not so much you being part of a collective. I think that you can't really go back to that you are part of a collective in a way of thinking, of making decisions. But you can think putting in place a certain system of collective responsibility, or like maybe you should say intersubjective responsibility, and maybe even for self-help can be a position you can still have, but it's very different from this I'm part of a whole and not an individual person, something that's sometimes pushed in those authoritarian modern Chinese narratives, right? If you talk to Asians or ask people what's the difference between Asia and Europe or the West, people don't see themselves so much as an individual, but part of a collective or a whole. I always feel it's often presented as if those were two equal choices. But I think it's not. It's more infantilization and a lack of growth and individuation that's been oppressed by authority, governments or culture in those regions.
I think that like society can serve as a backdrop against which you kind of accentuate who you are, or it could be almost like a mill that tries to destroy you and make you like an ant, like everyone, like all other people are. So I think that there's also like this humanistic view. Is society, is collective trying to develop the spark and this difference that all of us have? Or is it just trying to mold everyone in this kind of cog in the wheel? Again, typically these traditional cultures, they portray it somehow superior. They're not individualists, and people are less neurotic, less stressed in those societies. I think if you would dig deeper, the shadow side is huge because people need to suppress their individuality to become like everyone else, which psychologically also cannot be healthy.
I guess you see the successes of different cultures and regions. Success stories in terms of people becoming great by themselves or greatness in general is still linked to freedom stories. Right. I think it's interesting if you look at what this collectivism often really means. If you look at India, for example, it's often what it means. If you make decisions, you should consider what your mom and dad wants, no matter what the relationship is, and maybe even up to the second degree of an uncle. And other people, in a way, also consider what other people want. So there is this demand of not making choices that favor you or that are good for you, but that are good for your parents of maybe your uncle first and second degree. But yeah, even though it's not generally bad, of course, if you consider, for example, what your partner wants and act in that way, there's a certain
But it's also important whether those ones are genuine or they are kind of also function of other people, because then it becomes like emptiness, which builds on emptiness.
Yeah, and everyone. So I guess there's a certain rigid form demanding it and shaming people if they don't do it. So it's not so much, well, I do that because I love my partner and choose to do that. But it's more culturally enforced, and there's an upbringing of shame if you don't act in a way that benefits your parents. And then the next generation does that again. And I guess this is a suboptimal system of knowledge, of finding yourself, of being driven by negative incentives. If everyone did that more out of a genuine pull of love and also looking after themselves, would presumably be a healthier setup. Do you have some thoughts about individuation and how that relates to freedom beyond what we said already?
Well, basically the main thing that I want to say, I already said that in order to gain freedom, we need to understand who is that person who is gaining freedom.
Yeah.
Because if we are gaining freedom for some idealized but fake identity that we have, then it means that at some point of our lives, there is a massive disappointment waiting for us, that we gain something which was not really ours.
Thank you very much, Alex, for another session. And thank you,
Thanks, Sebastian.
listeners, for tuning in again.
Yeah.
And
write to us. If you disagree with us, I'm sure a lot of libertarians can vehemently argue that we are wrong. So we'll be curious to hear your opinions about individuation, freedom, shadow, and all those things.
yeah, please show us in which way we are wrong, so and we have an opportunity to learn. And till next time,
Take care.
hopefully. Take care.